Hello and welcome to this demo about managing identities in Microsoft Entra ID. My name is Navneet Kumar. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and the founder of Train Test Technologies. Agenda of this demo video is managing user identities, managing service principals in Entra ID, working with managed identities, system assigned identity and user assigned identities, working with devices, and working with groups in Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, is Microsoft's cloud-based identity and access management service. It is world's largest directory service that is used by millions of organizations to enable their employees, guests, and others to sign in and access the resources like applications or data that they need. Let me highlight some of the use cases of Microsoft Entra ID before we jump into the demonstrations. Microsoft Entra ID allows the internal resources like cloud applications developed by your own organization or on-premises applications on your corporate network that can be integrated with Entra ID. External services like Microsoft Office 365, Dynamics 365, Azure services, or any SaaS applications used by your organization use Entra ID as an identity provider. If you are a cloud-born company, then you can use the cloud-only identities. Or you also can synchronize the identities from your on-premises Active Directory or any other directory services to Microsoft Entra ID. You can also securely enable the use of mobile devices for accessing corporate applications and data. These devices can be either owned by your company, also referred as COD, company-owned devices, or bring your own device, also referred as BYOD. Microsoft Entra ID also enables the collaboration with businesses, partners, and customers. If you ask a question that where can I assign this identity, then answer will be that you can assign the identity to three different categories. These categories are the human beings, the workload identities. For the software-based objects, you can assign these identities, and also to the physical devices. You can group these identities together to assign the permissions or policies. If we talk about the first category, the human beings, so you can assign the identity to the human beings which are the employees of your organization, and they are typically configured as internal users. If these users are not your employees or part of your company's staff, then you can also invite external users, including the customers, consultants, or vendors and partners. For our purpose, we will refer to these as the user identities. You also can assign the identities to software-based objects like applications, virtual machines, services, containers, or any application that you develop. These identities are referred as workload identities. It includes service principals and the managed identities. Then we have physical devices. These physical devices can be the mobile phones, the desktops, and the IoT devices. And as I mentioned earlier, that we can group these identities to assign the permissions so that we need not to assign the permissions or policies to individuals. So we use the logical grouping of these identities. We have different types of groups in Entra ID, like security groups for the purpose of access control, and Microsoft 365 groups for the purpose of collaboration, like shared mailboxes or calendar, or for teams in Microsoft Teams. You want the users to collaborate with each other, you can create their team. The membership type to these groups can be assigned, which is a fixed assignment. You assign the users as a member of a particular group, whereas you can do the dynamic group membership as well based on the attributes of the users. If the user's attribute is changed, then the algorithm can check and change the group membership of the user automatically. So we can dynamically change the group membership of the users based on their attributes, like their department, their country, their job title. So as soon as the changes are done to the identity's attributes, then its membership will automatically change. Without any further delay, let's get into the demonstration for managing these identities in Microsoft Entra. To manage Microsoft Entra identity, you can use different portals or different management tools, which can be not only the graphical portals but the command line tools as well, like PowerShell modules, the Graph API or the Graph module for PowerShell. I will create another video on using Microsoft Graph PowerShell module for managing these identities. In this demonstration, I'll show you the management of these identities through the portal. In this portal, we can have entra.microsoft.com, which is dedicatedly designed and developed for managing the Microsoft Entra ID and the entire suite of products, including the identities, the identity protection, which includes the identity protection or the conditional access policies, etc. Identity governance, verified identity, or permission management, or global secure access. So we have various categories under this Microsoft Entra. It is not only the portal to manage the identities in Microsoft Entra. We can use the Azure Portal as well. We can go to the Entra ID, or it was formerly known as Azure Active Directory. So either I type Entra ID or Azure Active Directory, I can manage my directory from here as well. You will see I have the options to manage my directory, its identities like users, or the applications I can manage, or I can manage the devices. I can work with the groups as well over here. I also can use the Intune portal and the Office 365 Admin Center. Depending on your job role or the application that you use to manage, and depending on the access that has been granted to you, you will use a particular portal to manage these identities. These different portals may offer different capabilities and as well as the different interface. So you need to be familiar with that portal. Some of the capabilities may be available in one portal but not in other. For an instance, if I create a user account from Azure Portal, then during the creation of user account, I provide a temporary password, which is to be changed when the user will log in for the first time. But if I want to assign a fixed password and I do not want to force the users to change their passwords at the next login, then I can use other tools or the portals like Office 365 Admin Center or the PowerShell modules or other portals and tools I can use. When it comes to work with managed identities, then I will have to go with the Azure portal. I cannot use the managed identities through the Entra portal as of now. So that is where you will see that each portal can have different capabilities and the UI for the purpose of managing the identities. I will be using the Microsoft Entra portal, which is entra.microsoft.com or portal.azure.com for most of the administration of these identities in this demonstration. Well, let us get started by setting up this tenant, this Entra ID, with a domain name. When you have a directory or Entra ID tenant, so you will notice that it comes with a default domain, and this domain name you can see if I take you to the settings under the identities and to the domain names. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to add a custom domain name on the Entra ID. Each tenant comes with a initial domain name, also known as available or mandatory domain name. So this is the default domain name on each directory, which ends with .onmicrosoft.com suffix. I have option to add a custom domain to this directory, and this custom domain will be based on my organization's domain name for branding purpose. I work for a company xyz.com. I will add that domain to this directory, but wait, I will have to prove that I own this domain. For that purpose, I will have to create a text record in my DNS zone, public facing DNS zone of xyz.com. Once I publish that text record, then I'll click on verify. These will be the values for that text record. Once the text record has been published, then I can click on verify button to verify that the domain is added on my tenant. In this case, because I have not created this text record, so it failed to verify that. That means that I cannot use this domain name. So for this demonstration purpose, I will use that available domain name on this tenant, which is ending with .onmicrosoft.com. So companies add their own domain names to the directory by going to the add custom domain names. In fact, on one tenant, you can add multiple domain names. If your organization is having multiple domains, you can add them and you can set one of them as primary domain that is listed while creating the users or while using a domain name, so that will be given the priority. You can add up to 900 domains as of now, but this can change over the period of time. So in future, you can check for the Microsoft quota limitations in Azure and see the page that what is the limit of number of domains on a tenant. Once you are done by adding the domain on the tenant, then you can create the identities by going to the users and all users blade. Under the all users, you will see the list of users that you have in this tenant. You have a button to create the user accounts. Now, when it comes to create the user account, there are two options. Create a new user, a new internal user in your organization. That means this user belongs to your tenant, will be authenticating using the credentials that you will be creating and managing, and I mean to say the life cycle of that credential, the management of that account will be your responsibility. So you can create that user as a internal user. Whereas you have another option to invite external people like your customers or partners or any consultant as an external user to this directory by using their work or school accounts from the Entra ID that their company is having, or their social identity accounts, also social media identity accounts you can use to invite them as a guest. So we have these two options: creating a user as a new user over here, or inviting someone from external directory. Now when I create a user account, I will provide that user a name. For an instance, this user will be Alex at this domain name. I will provide the display name for this user. The password, I can see the password for this user also over here. I can go with either auto-generated password or I can define the password of my choice. I will copy this password for later use and then will ensure that the account is enabled. I can configure other properties which are actually optional parameters. I will ignore them for now, but you will be providing the necessary details. Then the assignment of the licenses and the group, to which group you want to assign these users. So add group and the role and to which administrative unit you want to add this user. And finally you click on review and create button to create this user account. You will notice this user type is the member of this directory. That means this user is a full-time employee or an employee or staff of my company. That user has been created as an internal user. But I can invite someone, external user, to my company as well from a different directory. Suppose there is another company which is abc.com and I want to invite the users from there. For an instance, this is Brad at abc.com. User will be sent an invite and then the user will be added over here as a guest. You will notice the user type here is guest. Now, that is not the only thing that we have the internal users as members and external users always as guest. Basically, we have four different combinations. These four combinations of these users are like this. If the user is internal to your directory, then you will add that user as an internal member. You see the option at the bottom right corner, internal member. The one that I did as of now, Alex, I added as an internal member of my company, of my directory. Sometimes you work for a large organization and that organization has multiple directories. Now you want to collaborate with other users from the other directory. That directory or that tenant also belong to the same company. Then you can invite those users, those external users, using their work accounts or their social media accounts, and you invite them as a guest to your directory. So you can invite them, but not as a guest, but not as a external guest, but an internal guest. So guest can be within your organization as well. You want to invite them to collaborate and work with a particular project. When we talk about members and the guest, these are the two user types. These are the two, two things for the user types property. Members have the access, uh, full access to the resources in your organization. You can assign them the particular roles, okay? Whereas guests have limited access. As the term suggests, they are guest users. They are contributing or collaborating with your organization. So when we create the users internally, these users can be internal members or can be internal guests as well. Suppose the same company has xyz.com and abc.com, two different directories with these two different domains. So I can invite the users from xyz.com to abc.com as an internal guest. When it comes to the external people which do not belong to your organization, you can invite them as external guests with limited access, of course. But if you are going to invite someone from external organization and still you want to treat them as the member of your organization to give them the access to the resources of your organization, not that limited access, then you can invite them and add them as the member. You have that option configurable under the user settings. If I take you to the user settings, you can decide here that how these guest users will be treated. So if you're going to do the business to business collaboration, you can decide that guest users have the same access as the members, which is most inclusive. That means you are inviting the users, the external users, as members. External guests or external people, I must not say guest, external people will be invited as the members of your directory. Whereas we have guest users have limited access to properties and memberships of directory objects. Then most restrictive option can be guest users access is restricted to properties and memberships of their own directory objects. So you can choose this option if you want to go with most restrictive way. Now, depending on your requirement, you can choose that whether you want to be most inclusive or permissive, or you want to be restrictive. Once we are done, by adding the users over here, then these user accounts will be used to authenticate and gain access to the resources. Right now you see the two users I invited or added. One was added as a member to this directory, whereas the other user is invited as the guest. If I talk about the internal guest, for an instance, this user LX is actually from a different directory and but the same company, so I can invite this user not as a member but as a guest. So once this user account is added, I can go to edit properties of this user and I can change the user type of this user to guest. So this user will be treated as internal guest. Internal means user resides in this directory, will be doing the authentications against this directory or against the credentials stored in this directory, but the user will have limited access because under the user settings I have done so. So guest users will have limited access and this user is no longer a member of this directory. It is treated as a guest. Here we go. Whereas I invited this user Brad as an external user and this was an external guest. Now I go to edit properties and I go to the user types and I change its membership type or user type to member. So this is an external member to my directory. User is not internal because user is not created here. User will be authenticating from that directory that has been used or that is the home realm of this user account. So user will be doing the SSO. User will be logging in through that directory. So this was the user Brad that I added, okay, and this was from abc.com domain. So I have added that user as a member. If I go to the users here and I show you the list of users, so this external user from a different domain that I added with abc.com has become the member of this directory now. So these are the four options that I discussed and shown you over here. Internal users from your directory can be internal guests or can be internal members with limited access or with complete access to the attributes of this directory. Whereas the external people can be invited as external guest, that means with limited access, or as external member. So these are the options to work with the user accounts in Entra ID. Now let's talk about the next uh, identity type or user type, identity type I must say, that is workload identities. Identities assigned to the workloads. These identities are actually used to do non-interactive authentications. There might be some applications, services, some scripts that need to access to the cloud applications or to the corporate data to do some automation on scheduled time, scheduled interval. So I need to do non-interactive authentication. Non-interactive, I mean to say that this will be done at the back end automatically. Unlike the users authenticate with their username passwords or passwordless authentication or multi-factor authentication they do, so that is actually a interactive form of authentication. But workload identities are actually the software objects. These are the applications, scripts, services that will be authenticating under the security context of the service principles. The service principle can be created in Entra ID by doing the app registration. As I mentioned, that these service principles are actually used by the workloads, the software objects. So I need to go to the applications to work with these identities. Here I have option to register the applications. Under the app registration, I can see all my applications registered here, or I can register my application over here. So new registration of the application I'll do, and this is for, let's say, test app. For testing purpose I will be using it. Now if I will be using the application within my tenant for single tenancy purpose within the Contoso domain within this directory, then I will choose this first option. But suppose I'm a SaaS provider, software as a service application provider, and I've developed a cloud application that I will sell to others. So people can use my application. I need to have multi-tenancy. In this case, I will increase the scope of my application to be accessed from other tenants as well. So this app will be registered with multi-tenancy. Here, there is a limitation that the other companies will have to have used their Entra ID tenant to access or to work with these applications. Suppose you want to provide this application beyond that Entra ID as well. So you can go with Entra ID, multi-tenancy, plus personal Microsoft account as well. Then if you want this with personal Microsoft accounts only, you can choose this option. Suppose I'm developing the application that I'll be using internally, so I'll choose that option to register the application. I can configure this redirection URL also over here, and I will click on register button. Because our concern here is not to only register the application and use that, but to work with the identity for the application. So we want to work with the service principle basically. So I want to show you that service principle, which is with this client ID that we'll be using. The object ID, the tenant ID, the AD tenant, Entra ID tenant, where this service principle has been created. So this information will be required to use this service principle. The difference between the application and the service principle is that the application has one-to-one mapping with the tenant, whereas the service principle can be mapped with multiple applications. I can use the same service principle with different scripts, different services, which can be the virtual machines, which can be any other application service that want to authenticate and want to use an identity to do the non-interactive authentication. Now the question is how the service principle authenticate, which authentication method it will use. So there are two options. The service principles can authenticate either with the help of certificates or with the passwords. You also can do the federation. Now I need to generate the password. There is a recommendation for the password for 180 days that it will expire every 180 days. So you need to rotate, you need to change the or renew the password of your service accounts. You can define that custom duration as well. Recommended is 180 days, 6 months. You can increase, decrease that also. And then you will provide it a name for which purpose you are using it. Once you create that, then there is a secret created over here. Now you can use this password and this information of the service principal and the tenant ID inside the application and use that service account or service principal to authenticate for that application. You can use it basically. Now the problem here is that the developer will have to maintain the password of these service principals. If this password is expired, which it will expire of course after 180 days, then the application will stop working. It will not have the access to the necessary resources that you have provided access to this service account because its password has been expired. So this is an additional overhead with the service principals. There is a solution which is referred as managed identity for these application services. A managed identity is a kind of managed service account which is actually created in the Azure, and its password is rotated automatically by Microsoft Entra ID platform. It means that we need not to rotate the password of this kind of identity. Managed identities are of two types: user assigned or system assigned. A system assigned identity lives and dies with the service. When you have a service where you want to use the identity, so it is created automatically. Let me show you an example. If I want to use a managed identity, then I will have to use that particular service, be it virtual machine scale set, or the function app, logic app, with which I want to use this identity. I have taken the example of a function app over here that I created already, and now I move to the settings of this application. This function app will have some code inside it that needs the access to some corporate data or the cloud applications where you need to provide the access. So this will run under the security context of this managed identity. I'll click on turn on for system assigned identity and click on save button. You will notice that a system assigned managed identity will be created for this. That I can assign the necessary access to the resources in Azure. Here I can do the assignment against this service. Suppose I want to delegate the access on it. Either I can start from here, or I can choose the scope of delegation. For an instance, I want to delegate access on a particular resource group or a resource. So I'll go to that resource group and we'll do identity and authentication, identity and access management, add role assignment. You will notice two options to do the role assignment. Suppose reader access to read the resources from this resource group, user group or service principal, or you want to assign access on managed identity. I'll choose managed identity, and then I will pick my managed identity from here of my function app. It will automatically pick that TC portal app that I created, the function app, and I will provide reader access on this. The good thing with system assigned managed identity is that it will live and die with the service. If I delete my function app, this identity will also be deleted automatically. But the problem with this managed identity is that it is having one-to-one mapping. If I have second function app, that will have a different identity, which makes the access control a difficult job. Suppose two applications or more than two applications need the same access to the resources. So I cannot have a single identity mapped on all different applications. I will have to delegate the access to all the identities of that individual application. If you want to do the mapping of one identity, with multiple applications, then you will have to go with user assigned. For that, you will have to create it. So because it is not system assigned managed identity, it is user assigned managed identity as the name suggests. So you will have to create it. User assigned managed identity. There are a few parameters you have to configure, like the subscription, the resource group where you want to create it, the region, the name for it, test managed identity. Tagging is optional. I will ignore that and create this user assigned managed identity. The benefit of using this user assigned managed identity is that I can map it on multiple applications. For an instance, one of my function application will use this. So I'll go to the function app and assign user assigned identity this time. This is my user assigned identity. This is how we can work with user assigned managed identities. So we have managed identities for the Azure services we can use. We can use them with the Azure automation account, with the virtual machine scale sets, function apps, logic apps, any type of Azure service that supports the managed identity. I can use it in this ecosystem of Microsoft Azure for these services. Next type of identity assignment is for the physical devices. These physical devices can be your desktops, laptops, mobile phones, or can be tablets or IoT devices as mentioned earlier. So these are physical devices. Why do we assign the identity to these devices? Actually, we want to enable the access of the enterprise applications, cloud applications securely on these devices, because today user need access to the cloud applications from different form factor and different types of devices. So we have different ways of enrolling or enabling the access to these devices. First option is Microsoft Entra ID registered devices. Registered devices are for bring your own device. The device belongs to the employee, to the user. It's a personal device of the user, but I want to have some sort of control on that device for accessing my organization data. So I want to use mobile device management and mobile application management solutions, MDM and MAM solutions like Intune in Microsoft. So for that purpose, I will enroll those devices with Entra ID. So for bring your own device, we use registered devices. If the device belongs to your company, it's a corporate owned device, COD, and it is joined to the Active Directory domain of your on-premises Active Directory, then you can go with Entra ID joint devices. You can join them to the Entra ID because these devices completely belong to the corporate. They are corporate owned devices. The another way is hybrid joint. If your devices are joined in on-premises to the ADDS, you can synchronize these identities to the cloud, to the Entra ID. So that is the hybrid joint. Let me show you them one by one. For an instance, I want to go with registered devices. So this device can be Windows 10 or Windows 11 device. Let me go to one of these devices here, which is Seattle Workstation 3 device, and I'm logged in here with a local admin account. This device is not part of the domain because it is my personal device. Like I said, registered devices is used for bring your own device. If I show you the properties of this device is having this device ID, system ID. It is Windows device, Windows 11. This device is okay, and these are other settings of this device over here. Now, domain or workgroup settings, if I show you, so this device is part of workgroup. It is not joined to any domain because it is my personal device. I will go to the settings application in the Windows 10 or 11 device, and then here I will use the accounts blade to add this device to the Entra ID. Here I have the option to access work or school at the bottom. Under the settings, accounts, access work or school. I need to add an account over here. I will provide a work account to join this device to the Entra ID. Not to join, I will use it for administration purpose. I will register it actually to, to meet the compliance of my organization. So I will provide the username and the password where I want to join this device. For an instance, I want to join it here. So this is my work account with which I want to join it. Okay, not join it, basically I'm registering it. If you want to join this device, if it is corporate owned device, then you will use this second option, which is join this device to Microsoft Entra ID. You remember I discussed about three things over here for devices: Microsoft Entra ID registered devices, and Entra ID joined, and then hybrid. So the first option I'm showing you right now is registering the device. If you want to join it, click on join this device to Entra ID if it is corporate owned device. You will hit the next button and you will provide the password and you will register this device with the Entra ID. This is how you can enroll a Windows 10 or 11 device. But suppose you have Android, iOS, or other platforms. So how do you enroll those devices to Entra ID? Then you have to go with the company portal app of Microsoft, and through company portal app you can register those devices to the Entra ID so that they can be controlled by MDM tools. So you can use company portal app to enroll them. This device has been joined to the Entra ID and its account will appear in the devices blade or devices section of the Entra ID. For hybrid join, we synchronize the identities, these computer accounts joined to the ADDS in on-premises through the Entra ID Connect tool. The Entra Connect tool synchronizes the identities including the users, groups, and as well as the computer accounts to the Entra ID. So we can sync them. So that is with hybrid. If we talk about the final topic, which is groups. So we have two types of groups in Entra ID. One is security group, which is used for the purpose of access control to delegate the access. And the second one is used for collaboration purpose in Microsoft 365 applications. So we use it for shared mailboxes or for calendars or for Microsoft Teams. How do we deal with the groups? For that, all you need to do is you need to go to the groups, all groups, and you can create a group over here. When you create a new group, there are options to configure it, like group type. Will it be a security group or Microsoft 365 group? If your purpose of creating a group is for access control, to delegate the access to the users who will be member of this group, go with security. If you want to use it for collaboration purpose only, for shared mailboxes, calendars, for Microsoft Teams, then go with Microsoft 365. Name this group and the group description, and then Microsoft Entra roles can be assigned to this group whether you want it or not. So you can decide. Assignment type, you see membership type is assigned. So you will have to assign that manually. You can go with dynamic users. You can define a query also. So based on the query that you have defined, you can change the membership. This is the query that you will be adding over here. In this query, you can provide your expressions, the property with a particular property you want. Let's say if users department is equals to IT, and let's say IT test especially, then user will be member of this group. This is one of the rule. Validate this rule. Okay, you can click on validate, and you can add the users also over here. Click on create button. If you change the attribute of the user, let me go with a user. Let's say this user Brad, and I added the properties of this user, and the property department is IT test. So the rule will be executed every 30 minutes. It will validate, it will check that if any results come with that query, and any user who has that attribute configured will automatically become the member of the group we have defined. So this is how we can deal with these groups. This dynamic group membership is a feature of premium directory. You need to have a premium tier. This is the dynamic type of membership. Assigned means fixed. You will have to manage the membership of the users manually. You will have to add or remove the users to a group manually. If I go to the group members list, I may or may not see that user as of now. It might take some time to reflect that user account over here. Well, this is how we can manage these identities in Entra ID. And the different type of identities we worked with are the user accounts for interactive authentications. We worked with the workload identities, identities assigned to the software workloads, software objects like applications or services in Azure, be it service principals through app registration, or managed identities for the Azure services. In managed identity, we have seen the system assigned identities and user assigned identities. System assigned identities have one-to-one mapping with the services, and their life cycle is with the service. They live and die with the services. Whereas the user assigned managed identities actually have to be created and mapped manually with the applications, but they can have one-to-many mapping. Then physical devices related identities. And finally, we worked with the groups. We have seen the group types also. Security groups and the Microsoft 365 groups are the type of groups. Membership types, either assigned or through the dynamic query. I hope this demonstration was informative to you. Thank you.